Stalwart sentries of the Emperor, the royal guards were known for their skill and absolute loyalty to their liege. Despite their reputation, it was one of their greatest warriors who would ultimately end Emperor Palpatine. From the ashes of the Dark Empire, a new empire, a Crimson Empire.
You are listening to the Star Lords Podcast.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Are you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder?
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
Karanor Jax.
Karanor Jax was born to a member of the Theresian Sun Guard, an elite mercenary brotherhood feared across the galaxy for their discipline and martial prowess, their yellow armor serving as the primary influence of what would later become the crimson armor of the Royal Guard. His father, a warrior of this infamous order, met his end at the hands of Darth Sidious after failing to retrieve the holocron of King Addas, the uniter of the Sith on Korriban, and hailed as the first Sith-Ari. Karanor Jax was forged in the crucible of the Galactic Empire, his ambition as sharp as the blades he would one day wield. As a young man, he enlisted as a stormtrooper, serving under the mysterious Agent Blackhole as one of the elite shadow-clad Blackhole stormtroopers. Even among these hardened warriors, Jax stood apart, his drive catching the eye of his superiors. It was not long before he was plucked from the ranks and sent to Yinkor, where the weak perished and the strong were honed into the Emperor's most feared enforcers, the Royal Guard. Yinkor was no mere training ground. It was a crucible of suffering, its desolate landscape a perfect backdrop for forging killers loyal only to the Emperor. The original inhabitants had long since been erased, their world repurposed for a singular goal, creating warriors fit to stand at Palpatine's side. Alongside 43 other recruits, Jax was thrust into constant training, mastering the brutal art of Echani and the deadly use of the Force Pike and Vibroblade. Under the watchful gaze of Master Ved Khanid, the recruits fought in the arena known as the Squall, where survival meant proving oneself time and time again. It was here that Jax first met Kir Kanos, his frequent sparring partner and eventual rival. Jax reveled in besting Kanos, taking every victory as proof of his own superiority. But even among the most skilled, one recruit stood above the rest, Burr Danid, a warrior of flawless technique. When Emperor Palpatine himself arrived to observe the training, Darth Vader summoned Danid into the Squall. Before the recruit's eyes, the Dark Lord ordered the young warrior to attack him without restraint. What followed was not a duel, but a lesson. Vader toyed with the so-called perfect fighter before cutting him down with ruthless ease. The display shook many of the recruits. Kanos was horrified. Jax, however, watched in silence, absorbing the true meaning of the Emperor's lesson. Perfection meant nothing without power. From that moment, he trained with singular focus, determined to become the strongest among them. As the trials intensified, the dwindling recruits were paired together, forced to rely on one another in brutal exercises designed to forge unbreakable bonds. Jax was partnered with Alum Frost, though he never truly respected his counterpart. To Jax, Frost was a means to an end, a tool to be used for survival. Together, they endured a full year of punishing trials, emerging as one of the last two surviving pairs. Then came the final test. Brought before the Emperor himself, Jax and Frost were handed vibroblades and given a single order. Only one would walk away. It was no contest. Jax cut his so-called brother down without hesitation, proving his worth in blood. As Frost's lifeless body was dragged away, Jax stood in silence, waiting to witness the fate of the last two recruits. Kanos and Lemet Tok entered in next, and Jax observed with keen interest as Kanos struck down his own partner, securing his place at the Emperor's side. In a private ceremony, beneath the gaze of Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine, Karanor Jax and Kyrkanos were elevated to the rank of Royal Guard. The weak had fallen away, and only the strongest remained.
A Tale of Two Guardsmen. Little is recorded of Karanor Jax's service within the Emperor's Royal Guard, but it is assumed that he carried out his duties with the same grit that had earned him his place among them. Yet, beneath the crimson armor and rigid discipline, his true allegiance lay not with Palpatine, nor with the Empire, but with his own ambition. Jax was no mere servant, he was a predator, waiting for the moment to rise. His absence from the second Death Star during the Battle of Endor spared him from annihilation. While his brethren perished alongside the Emperor, Jax remained on Coruscant for the last remnants of the once elite Royal Guard. In the chaotic aftermath of Palpatine's fall, he found himself under the command of State Pestage, the self-proclaimed acting Emperor, and later the calculating Issei Isard, Director of Imperial Intelligence. Yet Jax's true path was set when Isard granted a detachment of the Royal Guard to the enigmatic Dark Lady Lumia. Among them was Jax. Lumia, inheritor of the Sith's fragmented legacy, recognized the potential simmering within him, but Jax was not content to merely guard power. He sought to wield it. Lumia had seen his potential and molded him into something greater. Under her tutelage, he honed his connection to the Force, training aboard the Emperor's Revenge with an almost religious fervor. With but a thought, he could levitate and crush spheres mid-air, honing his telekinesis. It was the same mastery that allowed him to rip weapons from his enemies' hands and hurl debris with crushing force. His insight into the Force ran deep enough to unmask lies through interrogation. Seeing in him the makings of a true Sith, she took him as her apprentice, sharpening his raw ability in the Force. Together they hunted and eradicated the last of the prophets of the dark side on Bos Thirda, erasing a rival faction of mystics from existence. Under Lumia's tutelage, Jax refined his talents, specializing in telekinesis and precognition, gifts that would serve him well in the treacherous game of Imperial power struggles. It is possible that other dark side adepts also contributed to his training, further molding him into a weapon of his own making. As his power grew, so too did his influence. Through Lumia, Jax was introduced to Sarsev Quest, an ambitious Dark Jedi Imperial ruling council member with grand designs of his own. Quest, ever the political manipulator, saw in Jax the perfect figurehead, a powerful, charismatic commander who could seize control of the shattered empire while Quest worked from the shadows. Their alliance was one of mutual benefit, with Quest securing Jax a military force of his own. Armed with the Star Destroyers, Emperor's Revenge, and Steadfast, and a hardened contingent of troops under General Red Wessel, Jax prepared to stake his claim. Unlike the fractured Imperial warlords who clung to their starfleets, Jax, a soldier at heart, built his power base around the army. He surrounded himself with officers who understood ground warfare, favoring pragmatism over naval posturing. In a move reminiscent of the late Emperor, he even appointed his own hand, Lieutenant Geff Blim, tasked with carrying out his will in the shadows, much as Mara Jade had once done for Palpatine. During this time, Jax encountered a mysterious figure known as Nom Anor, an agent of an unseen force lurking beyond the galactic rim. He reported the meeting to Lumia, unknowingly brushing against the first whispers of a future invasion. Yet fate would deny Lumia the chance to act upon this knowledge. When Palpatine clawed his way back to power in 10 ABY, Karnor Jax outwardly resumed his role within the Royal Guard. But his true allegiances lay elsewhere. He had spent too long building his network, too long maneuvering through the shadows, to simply kneel before the reborn Emperor. Jax knew the inevitable confrontation was coming, and when it did, he intended to stand victorious. Together with Sarsev Quest, Jax set into motion a conspiracy to topple Palpatine once and for all. Quest, ever the cunning manipulator, ensured Jax's ascension to the rank of Imperial Sovereign Protector, a position that placed him dangerously close to the Emperor's inner circle. From this vantage point, Jax orchestrated a vast coup, his influence stretching through the ranks of the military, political elite, and even alien factions. Under his orders, General Red Wessel secured key supporters, including powerful civilian loyalists and even a whiphead spearmaster, adding to the growing web of traitors lurking beneath Palpatine's throne. Secrecy was paramount. Jax's meetings were guarded with the utmost caution, their security enforced through the pain of death. Dissent was not tolerated. Those who wavered, those who even hinted at betraying the plot, were swiftly eliminated. More often than not by the cold hand of Gef Blim, Jax's personal executioner. More than once it seemed that discovery was imminent, that the Emperor's wrath would come crashing down upon them all. But time and again, Blim's foresight and deadly precision ensured survival. The final strike came not with a blade, but with a bribe. Using the vast resources gathered by Quest and Wessel, Jax paid off Palpatine's personal physician, securing his place in history as the Emperor's true murderer. The physician, well compensated for his treachery, sabotaged the cloned bodies that housed the Emperor's dark essence. The results were devastating. Palpatine's remaining clones began to wither, aging rapidly into twisted husks, leaving the Sith Lord trapped in a cycle of decay. No longer able to sustain himself, Palpatine was forced into a desperate search for a new vessel. The end came on Onderon. The Emperor, his body failing, was finally destroyed, his very essence cast into the abyss. Meanwhile, in the deep core, R2-D2's actions obliterated Biss, the throne world Palpatine had sought to rebuild his dark empire upon. Jax had won. He may not have realized it, but in striking down the Emperor, he had avenged his father's death. The Sith Lord who had executed the Theurgian Sun Guard for failing him had, in turn, been undone by his own chosen warrior. Yet for Jax, vengeance was never the goal, power was. And with Palpatine's death, the throne was his for the taking. Karnor Jax was more than just a soldier. He was a predator, driven by insatiable hunger for power. Even among the elite candidates of the Emperor's Royal Guard, Jax refused to be anything less than the best. His ambitions burned like a furnace, fueling his rise through the ranks. And unlike lesser men, he understood that raw talent alone was not enough. Power required careful alliances, and Jax cultivated them with ruthless precision. Imperial Ruling Council, the shadowy manipulators of Sarsev Quest, and the teachings of Lumia, these were his stepping stones, the foundations of his ascension. It was this same cold, calculating ambition that made him an exceptional judge of threats. While others dismissed Kir Kanos as just another relic of the old order, Jax saw the truth. Kanos was a blade in the dark, poised to carve apart everything he had built. Jax knew that as surely as he knew his own strength. But if he was precise in his machinations, he was equally volatile in his fury. He brooked no failure from those who served him. His wrath was swift, his punishments brutal. It was a side of him that had not existed during the early days in the Imperial Royal Guard Academy. No, It had been forged in the crucible of the dark side, shaped by the whispers of Lumia and the intoxicating power of the Force. Kir Kanos.
Little is known of Kir Kanos' life before the Empire, but whatever past he carried, it forged him into a survivor. Like all the Emperor's royal guard, Kanos first distinguished himself as a stormtrooper, his skill earning him a place among the 43 elite recruits sent to the brutal training grounds of Yinkor. There, he endured merciless conditioning, constant combat, and the unforgiving trials of the Squall, the blood-soaked arena where only the strongest survived. It was in the Crucible that he first met Karnor Jax, a skilled and ambitious warrior who often bested him in combat. Despite his prowess, Kanos was not the most celebrated recruit. That honor belonged to Bur Danid. When Emperor Palpatine and Darth Vader visited Yinkor, Danid was chosen to showcase his skill against the Dark Lord himself, but the duel was a farce. Vader toyed with the young warrior before brutally cutting him down, his body discarded like refuse into the Squall. Kanos watched in stunned silence, absorbing the grim lesson. Only those truly worthy could serve the Emperor, and failure meant death. As their numbers dwindled, the remaining recruits were paired off to build bonds of trust. Kanos was partnered with Lemet Tok, and over the next year, the two became inseparable, relying on one another to survive the relentless trials. When they and Jax's pair were the last remaining, they were summoned before Emperor Palpatine for their final test. Kanos and Tok waited as Jax and his partner, Alum Frost, entered first. When the doors reopened, Jax stood alone, his partner dead at his feet. Then came Kanos' turn. The moment he and Tok stood before the Emperor, the order was given. They were to fight to the death. Kanos hesitated, but Vader's command left no room for defiance. Training took over, blade met blade, and in the end, Kanos drove his weapon through his best friend's stomach. As Tok fell lifeless to the floor, Kanos stood frozen in horror. But Palpatine merely smiled, pleased with his newest guard. Kanos barely had time to grieve before Vader advanced, igniting his lightsaber. Hesitation, regret, these were weaknesses unfit for a royal guard. Kanos attempted to defend himself, but he was no match for the Sith Lord. In a single punishing stroke, Vader's blade slashed through Kanos' helmet, leaving a deep, permanent scar across his face, a mark that would follow him the rest of his life. It was a wound and reminder he would carry forever.
Service. Now a fully inducted member of the Emperor's Royal Guard, Kir Kanos served with unwavering devotion for several years. But fate, indifferent to loyalty, would soon reshape his destiny. Kanos was spared the fate of many of his brethren when he was not stationed aboard the second Death Star during the Battle of Endor. As Palpatine fell, so too did the Empire's iron grip on the galaxy. Without an emperor to serve, Kanos drifted in the shadows, adhering to the ideals of his fallen master, even as the Empire fractured. But death was never truly the end for Palpatine. When he returned in a clone body, Kanos once more donned the Crimson Helm, resuming his place among the elite. Yet his renowned service would be brief. The Jedi Luke Skywalker and his allies struck a final, decisive blow, destroying Palpatine's last clone on Onderon and casting his dark essence into oblivion. With the Emperor truly dead, chaos followed. The throne world of Biss was annihilated, taking many of the remaining guard with it. Others perished aboard the Eclipse too, caught in the maelstrom of their master's downfall. Kanos was among the few who survived, with barely 20 of his brethren. He returned to Yinkor, where Master Ved Khanid led him in mourning. For 10 days they grieved, not just for the Emperor, but for the death of the order to which they had pledged their lives. Bloody betrayal.
The betrayal was uncovered in the final days of mourning. A lone royal guard, wounded and near death after a desperate flight from Onderon, stumbled into the Yinkor stronghold. His message shattered what little remained of their world. Caranor Jax had orchestrated the Emperor's death. The guard had overheard the confession of Palpatine's physician, captured by the rebels, revealing that Jax had bribed him to sabotage the Emperor's clones. His treachery had forced Palpatine into a failing body, ensuring his demise on Onderon. The surviving guards, already reeling from their loss, now had a purpose: vengeance. But Jax had foreseen this. To cover his crime, he unleashed a stormtrooper legion upon Yinkor. The massacre was swift and brutal. Though the Royal Guard fought with unmatched skill, cutting down hundreds, they were too few. In the chaos, Kir Kanos and Kyle Hanad found themselves backed into a corner, the last of their kind. With time slipping away, they cast lots to decide who would escape. Kanos was chosen. As he fled, Hanad made his last stand, holding back the tide of blaster fire until the facility erupted in flames. Now the last true Royal Guard, Kanos vanished into the stars, carrying only his oath to hunt Caranor Jax to the ends of the galaxy. Meanwhile, Jax seized power. Backed by Sarsev Quest and his conspirators, he installed himself as Dark Lord of the Sith and de facto Emperor, reshaping the Imperial ruling council in his own image. From his stronghold on Ord Cantrell, he presided over his Crimson Empire, extending his grip across the outer and mid-rim. Unlike his predecessors, Jax welcomed non-human allies. Whippids, Defel, Given, and Deveronians all found a place in his court. From the command bridge of the Emperor's Revenge, or the halls of his villa, he envisioned an empire reborn, one that would finally destroy the New Republic. Donning a modified form of his former Royal Guard armor, a mix of midnight black and red, usually reserved for the master trainer on the Yinkor Academy, to emphasize his new position as ruler. But one man, a lone survivor of the betrayal, clad in crimson, was coming for him.
A Crimson Empire. The Crimson Empire, much like the Dark Empire before it, upheld the Galactic Emperor as its supreme ruler. Yet, unlike its predecessors, it introduced a 12-member executive body, the Imperial Interim Ruling Council, infamously known as the Council of Blood. In a striking departure from the rigid, humanocentric policies of the old Galactic Empire, the Crimson Empire permitted aliens to serve on this council. To maintain the illusion of representative governance, the Interim Ruling Council established the Diet of Imperial Planetary Governors, a body whose true purpose was little more than to rubber stamp the Council's decree, lending a veneer of legitimacy to its rule. Like many Imperial remnants scattered across the deep core, the Crimson Empire struggled with depleted military strength. However, despite its limited forces, it still commanded a formidable arsenal. Its war machine boasted all-terrain scout transports, HAVW-A5 juggernauts, TIE crawlers, Chariot LAVs, TIE SA bombers, TIE IN interceptors, Imperial-class Star Destroyers, and Carrack-class light cruisers. Among its most notable military formations was the 133rd Imperial Fighter Group. Over its brief existence, the Empire's supreme command fell to a succession of officers: General Red Wessel, General Imodet, and ultimately an unidentified leader who faded into obscurity. This new empire stretched in a long corridor from the colonies to the outer rim, its borders pressing against the Pentastar alignment. Its dominion encompassed several key worlds, including Kilura, the Kal Hero system, Selenon, Ord Cantrell, Phaeda, Yinkor, and the D'Astan sector. However, its influence extended beyond these holdings. The presence of alien counselors, Wipid Ch'unk, Defel-Za, Devaronian Manos, and Given Kuluda Fife, secured the Crimson Empire isolated pockets of control in distant regions, further complicating the ever-shifting landscape of Imperial splinter factions. Rogue Revenge.
Kir Kanos remained a specter in the shadows, always on the move, never lingering long enough to be caught. Aboard a disguised skip spray blast boat, he briefly took refuge on Zaja before luring his pursuers into a deadly trap. Karanor Jax, intent on wiping out the last of the loyal servants of the Emperor, had placed an immense bounty on Kanos' head, forcing him to retreat to the fringes of the galaxy. Drifting from world to world, he eventually arrived on Fedea, a backwater planet where the Empire's grip was tenuous but ever-present. Slipping past the authorities with a well-placed bribe, Kanos sought a moment of respite in a seedy cantina. But peace was a fleeting illusion. As he eavesdropped on a group of Imperial officers, tensions escalated into violence. Blades flashed, blasters rang out, and when the dust settled, the Imperials lay dead at his feet. Reinforcements came, an entire squad of stormtroopers, but Kanos cut them down before vanishing into the streets. It was Tem Merkan, a New Republic sympathizer and Imperial double agent, who offered him sanctuary, leading him to a hidden underground refuge. Meanwhile, Jax's obsession with Kanos consumed him. He set aside his grand plans for galactic domination, focusing instead on eliminating the rogue guardsmen. Tracing Kanos' last known location to Zaja, he walked directly into the trap, an explosive detonation that wiped out a detachment of his stormtroopers. Enraged, Jax turned to the remnants of the dreaded Black Hole stormtroopers, subjecting them to even harsher training to ensure that when they met Kanos, they would not fall. On Fedea, Kanos found himself reluctantly entangled with the New Republic. Mirith Sin, a hardened commander with her own vendetta against the Empire, saw in him both a potential ally and an enigma. Though Kanos loathed the Republic, they shared a common enemy, and for a time an uneasy alliance was struck. A bond, perhaps something deeper, began to form between him and Sin, but the war would allow no such distractions. Betrayal came swiftly. Tem Merkan, the very man who had sheltered him, sold their location to the Empire. The assault was brutal. Imperial Colonel Zexus Shev led the charge, but Kanos was not so easily hunted. With blade and blaster, he carved through the enemy ranks, turning the tide of battle into the Republic's favor. Yet, even in victory, he knew his reprieve was temporary. The Empire would never cease its pursuit. Sin, recognizing this, provided him with the Scimitar assault bomber, allowing him to slip away once more.
Sic Semper Proditoribus. His destination on Yinkor, the Crucible, where the Emperor's royal guard had been forged. There, Kanos prepared his final gambit, rigging his ship with explosives and waiting. When Jax's forces arrived, General Red Wessel spotted Kanos' bomber and moved to capture it. But Jax, wary of Kanos' cunning, refused to take the bait. He abandoned Wessel to his fate, descending to the planet with his Black Hole troopers and his assistant, Blim. The trap was sprung. The scimitar detonated, tearing apart the Emperor's revenge and killing Wessel in an instant. On the surface, Jax prepared for his ultimate confrontation, positioning Blim in the shadows as a failsafe. But Kanos was no ordinary foe. As Jax's stormtroopers swept through the Yinkori facility, one by one they fell, cut down in brutal, efficient silence. Jax had no choice. He would face Kanos alone. The two warriors met in the Squall, the very arena where Jax had once been the undisputed victor. But Kanos was no longer an acolyte. He was vengeance incarnate. They clashed, steel against steel, fury against power. Jax wielded the Force like a hammer, hurling debris and striking with preternatural speed. Yet, Kanos' rage burned brighter, his skill honed to a deadly edge. He disarmed Jax, granting him a fleeting moment of mercy, one that Jax repaid with treachery. With a flick of his will, he sent a boulder crashing into the back of Kanos' skull, nearly breaking him. Victory was within Jax's grasp. Signaling for Blim to end it, he turned, only to find out his assassin slain. Mirith Sin and her Trandoshan bodyguard, Sish Sadit, had arrived, intent on capturing Jax alive. The would-be Emperor saw opportunity. With a quick force pull, he snatched Sadit's blaster, aiming for Sin's heart. But Kanos did not hesitate. The vibroblade struck true, piercing Jax's chest. The false Emperor grasped, blood bubbling at his lips. With fading breath, he sneered that Kanos' friends had wanted him alive. Kanos answered coldly, "They were not my friends." With final act of contempt, he tore Jax's helmet away. The man beneath was unworthy of it. Sin and Sadit were horrified. They had hoped to take Jax prisoner, to use him as a weapon against what remained of the Empire. But Kanos had no interest in their war. When Sadit moved to stop him, the Trandoshan was met with a swift, merciless strike, his own lifeblood staining Kanos' blade. Sin's cry of anguish echoed through the empty arena, but Kanos remained unmoved. He had walked this path alone. He would continue to do so. There were others who still lived, others who had betrayed the Emperor. The Imperial Interim Ruling Council would answer for their treachery. Without another word, he turned from the fallen, stepping into the shadows once more. Vengeance was not yet complete.
Welcome aboard the Millennial Falcon. This is Christian.
And this is Jordan.
We're currently orbiting the planet of Yinkor, or Yinchor, as some people call it. The uneducated.
Definitely not the correct pronunciation.
But yeah, before we go further on our quest, throw it over to you, Jordan.
Yeah, so first of all, obviously, we want to thank all of our supporting listeners for helping to keep this bucket of bolts in the air flying so we can keep bringing you the best Star Wars podcast on the HoloNet. There isn't a better one. Come on, you know it's true. But if you wanted to be a supporter of the show, Patreon. Patreon.com/StarLords, $3 a month, and you can get access to all the bonus episodes. For $5 on the $5 tier, you not only get access to all the bonus episodes, but you also get ad-free listening, which is good because ads are annoying. And we just put them up there so to incentivize you guys to go to the Patreon. Also, just to help keep pay the bills, blah, blah, blah. Okay. We also accept single donations on PayPal, starlordspodcast@gmail.com. You can also buy merch on redbubble.com. Just search Star Wars and Redbubble. Link is also in the description, so make sure you find that too. If you want to support the show, help get us out, spread the word, spread the good news of your Lord and Savior, the Star Wars podcast. Rate and review the show on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, rather. Yeah, I think, because I don't listen to Apple. I don't use an Apple phone, so Apple Podcasts and Spotify are the two big ones. But wherever, if you have a rating option on your podcast app, by all means, give us a rate and review. That helps to spread the show, and just share it with friends, family, people you think might like it. Blah blah blah. Also follow us on social media. We are on Discord, Instagram, X, Facebook. And you can just find us there on any of those platforms. Just search Star Lords and you will find us. Again, links also in the description of this episode. For any other business inquiries, comments, suggestions, cosplay, collections, so on and so forth, anything Star Wars related, send it to us, guys, in a DM on our social media platforms or in an email, starlordspodcast@gmail.com, and find us there. Send us all your stuff. And also, one big shout out, make sure you go check out the YouTube channel. Go subscribe to it. We started doing live streams. We want to start doing some regular live streams that are separate from our regular podcast stream. Where we just talk about sort of Star Wars current events, fun Star Wars topics, go a little bit off the beaten path than what we typically do on the regular feed. So yeah, go to YouTube and check those out. All right, Christian, the Crimson Empire.
Yeah, it's for those who haven't experienced it. It was first published as a comic book series. There are 3 parts now, so we really only covered the first part. But it was a fairly well received story. It was definitely a darker, more mature Star Wars, and it was published kind of in tandem with Dark Empire, which we covered in a previous episode, which had a lot more glaring issues. That's a whole like Palpatine Returns kind of arc.
Yeah.
And this was kind of a redemption to that story in the sense of like telling a new story, a unique story, ending the Palpatine cycle. Just introducing a lot of cool concepts.
I do feel like the whole Crimson Empire era does just finally put to rest Palpatine.
Yeah.
Like finally, like we're closing that door. That chapter is over.
No more clones, no more spirits, no more.
Yeah. No children of Palpatine looking at you, Disney.
It was definitely a way to close off a lot of loops.
Yeah.
And it's very strange. And Crimson Empire is fairly well received within the fan community. And it's kind of strange how it was co-produced with Dark Empire, and you have like one not so well received and one highly praised works kind of working together.
Yeah.
Really.
I think really the strength of Crimson Empire, the whole story arc really is just, it's more character driven by these 2 original characters who aren't seen in any
other materials.
Yeah, other materials.
Technically, yeah. I was going to say like kind of spinning off of Dark Empire with Karen Orjax, but
yeah. But Karen Orjax and
Kir Kanos.
Yeah, Kir Kanos being these sort of 2 primary characters. I think it's like a sweet dynamic they got going with these characters.
It's a classic revenge story, actually. Your Kill Bill, your samurai or Western.
Yeah, it's almost a Western, Like that's kind of the vibes I got almost a little bit. But yeah.
Absolutely.
I do like, again, I like going off. I think it's hard to do. There's so much Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Mara Jade, Princess Leia stories that kind of come out after the Thrawn trilogy. And the problem with doing those characters is that like you're always having to constantly raise the stakes all the time because they've already saved the galaxy once.
Yeah, and where do you go with character development and stuff without changing them too much for future writers? And and there's a lot of baggage that comes with one of those established characters. Yeah,
and you kind of have Luke Skywalker kind of being the main character almost too much, where he should be, I don't want to say relegated, but maybe delegated to to a supporting role, right? For other characters. Like Luke Skywalker's already done everything he needs to do. Like he doesn't need to prove anything else. Obviously I think like the death of Luke Skywalker and stuff is important. Those are stories that you could tell later, but like just in the interim with all these other stories, it's like where he becomes more of a background character, and the whole people from the original become more background to support like new interesting characters. So
Yeah, instead of just killing them off and trying to ramrod your new characters into people's faces.
Yeah.
That might be a good approach.
Yeah, exactly.
Just saying. Yeah. But Crimson Empire. There's a very good audio drama too that's actually based on Crimson Empire that's available even on YouTube. So definitely encourage people, if you don't have the comic or can't get a hold of the comic, to go on YouTube and check that out. There are some inconsistencies I found with the audio drama. One of the notable ones being where Karanor Jax and Kir Kanos meet. It's established that they meet on Yinkor for the first time as recruits. They were both drawn from the Stormtrooper Corps, but they weren't like pre-existing friends or anything like that, or knew each other before that. But in the audio drama, it sounds like they came from even the same unit and were elevated together, and had even like previously fought before together as stormtroopers. So there's a lot of like minor differences. Nothing that changes the arc of the story, but little things like that you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, I almost like that a little better though. Like I almost want to make, to me in my mind, I'm making these guys almost brothers. It's cool to have like this brother or best friend thing where then the betrayal happens and then they turn on each other. That's like, it's always a great story. It's such a classic.
Anakin and Obi-Wan.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories like that, right? But yeah, it's just like a total classic. But I take your point though. It is a little bit inconsistent.
And there's a couple of things like that. Just like the language the characters use is a little bit different from the comic book versus the audio drama. Just little things that kind of like you pick up on if you've read them both.
Yeah,
or consume them both, I should say. A couple other things is Randy Stradley, when writing Crimson Empire, he kind of was thinking that the Royal Guards would all be clones, and it was supposed to be a case to kind of speaking to your closeness of the relationship of Karanor Jax and Kir Kanos, that when he unmasks Jax, it was supposed to show that they were both the same, right? Like you take off the helmet, it's your face too, right?
Yeah.
But they kind of gave that up for the story of like Jax's father coming from the Sun Guard and all that. And Jax was, and they were kind of playing with the idea that Jax would have been the prime clone even. So it's like a clone fighting his like true self, I guess you could say.
Right.
But yeah, they scrapped all that, obviously.
I don't hate that idea though.
No, it could be good, especially when you've established that how cloning can work in Star Wars a number of different ways. It certainly wouldn't be a bad story, but
do you prefer the one they went with as opposed to that, or do you kind of agnostic about it?
I'd say I'm agnostic. I think there's pros and cons to either version.
Yeah.
Obviously, one of them is the version, so I wouldn't even call it a version.
Sure, yeah.
One's the truth and one's a fan fiction.
A hypothetical, yeah.
Yeah. There's pros and cons of both. I mean, we've just gone through multiple clone stories. Like, do we need another clone story, right? It could get kind of repetitive.
Yeah.
Versus, like, it's sometimes nice to see individuals in the galaxy doing their own things. I do like the Theresian Sun Guard as well. We've touched on them in the past. Yeah, they look very cool. Yeah. They look like a mix between Mandalorians and Royal Guard, which are some of the two coolest armor sets you could combine. On that note as well, Crimson Empire kind of introduced the Royal Guard's full armor. So the Royal Guards are introduced in Star Wars in the movies as just wearing these like flowing red robes and having the big red helmet.
Yeah. We don't really see them in armor.
Yeah, and they don't even do anything in the movie. They don't fight.
Just stand there. Yeah.
And they do look intimidating, but it's like you'd kind of like to see these guys do something. Mm-hmm. So this is a cool showcasing in Crimson Empire where they do things. They do a lot of things, and they are incredibly powerful warriors.
And this is kind of one of the things too where where you get like false memories or like the Mandela effect,
Yeah.
where you're like, I thought the Red Guard did like, or the Royal Guard, sorry, did way more, but then I go and watch the movies.
Oh,
again.
no, yeah.
they
don't
do like
anything.
nothing.
Literally nothing.
I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, you know what? I was probably just reading stuff like the Crimson Empire
and like mentally
yeah,
inserting them.
over time, because I read that so long ago,
Yeah.
it just like kind of blurred together, right?
It's
So,
entirely possible.
yeah.
And you'll hear me say this very few times. Credit to the Skywalker movie,
Rise of
The Last
Skywalker.
Jedi.
Oh, The Last Jedi,
Yeah.
yeah.
Credit to The Last Jedi, where their Praetorian Guard, which are obviously the red versions of these guys,
I think
do
that they look
fight.
cool.
Yeah, they look cool, but they also fight.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
actually do something.
Yeah.
Yeah, whereas Palpatine's guards are dismissed right away, or Yoda just like knocks them out the minute you see them, and they are totally irrelevant.
And I do feel like it in a criticism of the original trilogy too is kind of a wasted opportunity, because I think you look at them and they look so cool and like interesting and a lot of mystique around them, but they're not utilized in any way.
Yeah.
And obviously other people thought that too, because then they wrote about it incessantly.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, we really want to see these guys do something,
Yeah,
so we're going to
exactly.
make them do some stuff.
Yeah, even Disney's version did
make
that
them
too.
do something.
We're like, hey, we want them to do something,
Yeah,
right? Yeah, so
absolutely.
for sure.
And again, to that point, Crimson Empire really expounds on how they fight, what they look like, what their armor looks like underneath, which is very cool.
Yeah,
So yeah, typically they're wearing those red robes, but you see some really cool shots. Some of my favorite Star Wars art is a Royal Guard with his double-bladed vibro blade fighting off like a legion of stormtroopers in the rain. It just like that is like the most hardcore Star Wars imagery.
yeah.
And there's quite a few images. One of them with a legion of stormtroopers behind them and fire. Like all the covers for Crimson Empire are like 10 out of 10 artwork. Just the most badass stuff you'll ever see for Star Wars. Kind of gives me a little bit of the big Conan artist. Frank Frazetta. Like very strong, almost Frazetta-esque, but PG-13 for Star Wars type art. It's some of the best stuff you'll find out there. There's also a funny thing that happened is in 2021, they did the 50th anniversary action figure for Karanor Jax, but it was actually Kyrkanos. So that's a pretty big blunder. Now, to be fair, they do look very similar. One is they like. Again, for those
is there any difference in their armor?
Yeah, well, one's black and red, and the other one's just red.
Yeah. Right.
And that should be noted to listeners who haven't read the comic book or seen the characters.
Yeah.
I always mix them up too in my head, which doesn't help.
Yeah.
Karanor Jax has black and red armor. He's like the would-be emperor.
Yeah.
And also his visor's almost like his lenses are more rounded instead of being that slit. But very much wearing like Royal Guard armor, just black and red.
Yeah.
And then Karanor Jax is wearing his red armor.
Totally.
Or, sorry, Kyrkanos is wearing his full red armor.
Right.
Yeah, go on.
There was actually one, I should have mentioned this when we're talking more about the story too, but one other observation I do kind of like about this, just about Karanor Jax, in terms of it's kind of like a rags to riches where he really starts from the bottom of the empire and like makes it
Works
all the
his
way
way up. Yeah.
to the top, where I don't think any other major imperial leader has that kind of path to ascendancy that I can think of. And I do think it's cool that he embeds himself, like he's very patient and embeds himself inside the system. And just like waits for the right time to strike. I think like it's just good writing,
Yeah, I don't know. I'm a little bit mystified as to his motivation. Like if treachery was always at his heart, or if he's an opportunist who saw a moment to take control. And that's two very different stories.
I think he planned it though, did he not?
Well, he would have from the point of when the emperors were coming back as a clone.
Yes, yeah.
And he was, while he was being groomed by Lumia, the Dark Lady, he definitely started to pursue his own ambitions, which is very Sith teaching, right? Yeah. Maybe I have to go back and when we go through Lumia's story, there'll be more clarity to that about whether or not he had always planned a moment of conquest, or if he saw a moment where, okay, the emperor's already been killed a couple of times.
Yeah.
He's going a little bit crazy.
I also
now is the time to seize control.
Yeah, I also think that like it is a little bit. This actually, the whole writing of his character introduces some good wrinkles, I think, that are important, because if you think about it, like someone like Palpatine coming back in a clone body and getting killed again in that clone body, and then he's going to come back again.
Yeah.
Like, I think the power structure, the institution of the Empire could not handle that kind of chaos, right? Like, this is just like someone's going to come in and say, like, this is just a ridiculous way to rule an empire. Like, this is
No.
You know, it's just very unstable, it seems, you know, and obviously with the clones going crazy and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I do think, especially in the Empire, which is, you know, subtly influenced by the dark side, especially among the higher ranks of people, you would see more ambition and more.
It would select for a certain type of person.
Yeah, exactly, and more people willing to be opportunistic when something like that happens,
or cutthroat or ruthless. Or,
so it brings a little more. Reinforces what really the Empire is and should be in a lot of ways, and why the Empire ultimately is kind of unstable
and unsustainable.
Yeah.
And that is true, regardless of his total motivations. Yeah, you're right. I think it does speak to a bigger, more complex view of the Empire.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do, again, absolutely love the classic revenge samurai / Western theme. That's very Star Wars as well, right? Like, they're drawing on the same elements that make Star Wars.
Totally.
Which, yeah, I think that speaks to the credit of how fondly Crimson Empire stories are remembered. Like I said, it is divided into 3 parts. We've only really covered part 1 in this, but our friend Kira Kanos will be back again in future episodes to tell the rest of his story.
Absolutely. And with that, make sure, guys, you reach out to us on social media. We are on Instagram, Facebook, X.com, and Discord. Discord's always fun. Get to connect with people there. So hop on the Discord and hang out with us.
Let us know what you thought of Crimson Empire.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you have as good memories of it as we do. All right. We'll see you later.